Hello, Tracy, and welcome to Author Chat.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so thrilled to be here.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. And yeah, it's wonderful to have a guest of your caliber on our show.
Oh, thank you. This is just shamelessly self-indulgent for me because there's very few things that I prefer than kind of chatting about kind of folk horror and gothic and all things writing because, we're very introverted little characters who sit in our studies and scribble, like I was doing earlier. So it's so nice to actually tease out some of that process together.
Absolutely. I was at the ALI, the Alliance of Independent Authors, their post-book week drinks. And I went in there, I didn't know anyone. And lovely lady sort of said, "Oh, you look a bit lost. What genre are you?" I went, "Oh, horror author." And she goes, "Right, look in the corners. They've all got social anxiety. I'll introduce you to a few of them." I was like, "Right, I'm in good hands, good hands."
I have to say, hands down, the loveliest people as well, horror
Oh God, yeah.
writers. It seems that a lot of people exercise their demons through their writing and remain
Yeah.
perfectly lovely in real life.
I did get a warning from the same lady. She was like, "Right, over there are the romance writers. Be careful. They're like the cast of Mean Girls." I was like, "Right, okay."
I love it. Well, I'm just fresh from a ghost conference,
Oh,
which closed on Friday here in Limerick. And again, I mean, I wrote rapturously to a friend of mine on the way home from the opening. I've just seen a mummified cat and a cursing stone, and I've met an old acquaintance of mine who's an expert in stigmata. So
mm,
I think that conferences of the weird and conventions of horror tends to draw, shall we say, a lot of kindred spirits together.
absolutely. Yeah. Some good soulmates, and also everyone's got a character. After working in the city for 20 years, it's nice to meet people with who aren't carbon cutouts.
I
Or
don't think you could say that of horror writers. Absolutely, yeah.
yeah,
Unless the kind of spectral kind of paper dolls.
yeah, maybe always a risk. So, um, inspired, like when you were sort of fresh-faced, what inspired you to become a horror author?
um, Everything. Um, I think that, just to paraphrase, I think the horror life chose me because it was just always something I was drawn to, even as a child. With fairy stories, I'd kind of ruminate over kind of the malignant characters. Like to this day, I firmly believe if I don't get in the front door fast enough, the giant from Jack and the Beanstalk is going to be right behind me. So I had a really, I suppose, kind of um, immediate kind of effective quality that kind of stemmed from these kind of encounters with the supernatural and the strange. But also, it was what I was reading. I mean, when I was a tween, I was reading Edgar Allan Poe and Ray Bradbury, and Jane Eyre was kind of one of my
Yeah.
favorites. But also, I loved Misty, paranormal comic for girls.
Oh,
You're
okay.
way too young to remember that one, but it
I've
was
never been called too young before.
there you go. But this was an amazing comic, and a reasonably short run. But Pat Mills wrote for it. I mean, I didn't know any of this at the time. I just knew that these were paranormal stories for girls. So they had this wonderful kind of folk horror feel about them, but also the kind of traverse the land between the spectral and like Roald Dahl's Tales of the Unexpected.
Oh
There were
yeah.
lots of girls imprisoned forever behind paintings, and yeah, it was just so that was really influential because horror to me was also something I wrote as a child because or as a teenager because I had a job writing short stories for local radio for a while. And that was pirate radio, so it was all very unorthodox. But basically, I would come home from school on Friday and I would write a short story and I would read it out on Saturday. So there was no such thing as kind of fear of the blank page or anything. It was like my little Saturday job. And most of those stories were really, I'd say all of them were really terrible, but there were some terrible examples I remember that were absolute rip-offs from Misty or Roald Dahl or whatever I happened to be reading at the time. But in a way that kind of let me kind of test out, I suppose, different modes of terror and horror.
Yeah.
And and finally, I suppose horror was what I was hearing around me as well, because I was brought up in the Irish countryside and I was really influenced by stories, especially that my grandmother told, that were to do with kind of legends. So, impossible stories that happened in real places and spaces and to real people.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I think history is so phenomenal with these things. Like I reading about the Morrigan when I was young. Uh,
Mm.
yeah, I actually I wrote a novella about a sort of modern take on the Morrigan because
I
I
have to read this.
I
That's
will
amazing.
send you a copy. Uh,
Thank
because I wanted to sort of bring it into for a modern audience, but they have such an impact. And I had this sort of idea that what would these sort of eternal guardians be like in a modern day world? What's the biggest threat that Ireland faces? And it's not warlords, it's climate change, it's all these
Oh, I
things.
love that. Yeah,
Wow, I'm gonna close my window because someone's decided to mow their lawn.
it could be the Morrigan.
It could be, yeah, all three of them at once with like a triple lawnmower.
Kind of a triple lawnmower effect. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I had a similar sort of induction into horror from a very young age. With me, it was Clive Barker.
Oh,
Um,
Clive Barker. Weave World was a book I really fell in love with.
that's the one book I haven't read. I've got it on my bookshelves. I just ordered it, so I'm waiting. My office is being refurbished at the moment. I'm in the gaming room at the moment, and
I love all these zones, by the way.
yeah, I'm very compartmentalized. And yeah, I'm looking forward to getting all my books up on my new. I've just had floor to ceiling bookcases installed, and yeah, that'll be the first book that I read.
Well, all I can say is you got a treat in store. It's so rich.
He does have this wonderfully visceral way of writing. He
Mm,
he has a lovely way of getting just the right amount of gore in. So I wouldn't say that his stories are like extreme horror, but
yeah.
they definitely toe the line there.
I mean, I write body horror, but I don't like extreme horror. I know that sounds quite contradictory, but I think that for me, if I'm going to use a visceral element, there has to be a really good rationale for it being
Yeah,
there. And it has to act in some kind of metaphorical way for an opening up of the text.
yeah,
Um, I always think of what lovely American writer David Surface said, that the wound is where the supernatural comes in, and that's more what I like about body horror. It's just this splitting apart of everything we know.
that's a beautiful way of saying it. I much prefer splatterpunk because I like my horror to have a sort of moralistic element to it. So if there's going to be an extreme horror, there has to be a reason for it, and people have to get their comeuppance. Whereas in extreme horror, the extreme horror is the point.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you don't necessarily need to use it for a purpose.
Yeah, I find some of it a bit problematic, I'll be honest.
Yeah.
Particularly extreme horror that's quite exploitative.
Yeah.
Because I think I'm really reverent about horror and what it can do and the perspectives that can open up. And I think like any mode, it's it's good to use it thoughtfully and to lean into why we're writing. That's really
Yeah.
important for me, writing from the heart rather than from the mind or thinking about audience or any of these things. Um, and I think from what you were saying about the Marrigan, that you probably have a very similar thing of, I'm really responding to this and I don't know why, and I need to write it out in some way.
Yeah. I also think that horror is kind of like comedy in that you should always aim to punch up, because reading a book about a character who's had a terrible life and then encounters something worse and then gets crushed, it's not particularly exciting. But watching someone get taken down who's been uh, oppressive, um, noble or wealthy, someone who's got all this power, and then watching that power get taken away, or meeting someone who's got more power is much more interesting for me.
Mm. Or as Stephen King puts it, and I'm going to paraphrase, it's kind of like I'll go for terror, and if I can't get terror, I'll get horror. If I can't get
Yeah.
horror, I'll go for the gross out.
Yeah. Oh, I love Stephen King. I think his book on writing is one of my favorites.
Yeah, yes. I always recommend it to my students to read.
Yeah, absolutely. Even if it's just learning about his life as well and what he went through growing up.
Oh, it's
It
just
really,
wonderful because he's such a
yeah.
warm, folksy writer anyway. And I think once he leans into this almost autoethnographical lens of looking at horror, like Danse Macabre as well, it becomes something really exciting. I
Yeah.
mean, it was through reading Danse Macabre in the late 80s that I became aware of Shirley Jackson and Ramsey Campbell.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
just, it was a portal.
Yeah. Your gateway drug.
Yeah, kind of.
So you mentioned that your grandmother was a huge influence on you, and in particular, looking for Wild Goose Lodge.
Oh yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I I I can I can talk about that, but I will have to limit myself very severely because I could probably do the entire podcast about that one story. Uh, basically, it was the first story that I wrote and had published, and the first story I ever submitted. It was all very charmed, and I wrote it in 2 hours because it's a really short story, might I say, but my anyway, we can discuss and compare methodologies of writing later, but it was something that just kind of came out, and
Yeah.
as you know, that doesn't often happen when something is birthed and fully formed, kind of just flows and it's done. um, but this was a story that I first heard as a bedtime story, and it's an atrocity story from 1816, where a family were burned alive with their servants, and it was part of the agrarian land wars in Ireland.
Mm.
And then 17 men were executed, but because a reward was put up, it was speculated later many of these were innocent, but their remains were gibbeted, like hung in iron cages up and down the roads where my grandparents lived. And so there was this lingering terrible fear in the locality, even even now, of kind of speaking directly about the story because it was so
Yeah.
sensitive, so horrific. I mean, I won't go into the details, but anybody who's interested, there's an amazing book by Terence Dooley called The Murders at Wild Goose Lodge, which divulges the full story. But so that was a story that just kind of came out, and it it was only in the writing of it that I realized that it was a hymn to my grandmother, who was
Oh,
just such an amazing storyteller. And so for me, a lot of what I do is kind of honoring her legacy. Um, and also because for me, I suppose writing's about meaning making, and um, because I don't have children,
Be bit.
writing is kind of how I um, I suppose writing is how I kind of make sense of these narratives, but also look to transmit them and pass them on and retell them in different ways. But anyway, that story is only like the tip of an iceberg of that whole project, which became a chapter of my PhD. It became a 3-year memory project collecting folkloric narratives from 5 different families in the locality. And I even played an extra, a village girl in a film of Wild Goose Lodge that was made in
Oh, fantastic.
2016 or
You got
2015.
you got to take it full circle then.
Oh, it was like total immersion. And I still think that there's a lot more that's calling me about that project, but I've had to just shut my ears for the moment.
It's so like having family members who can inspire you in this way. It's so lucky I find because my mother was a librarian her entire life,
Oh, amazing.
and so from my earliest memory is I had books. I always had books. I had access to the whole school library service. And when I first got into writing, I wrote a novel, and she was very much on my mind when I wrote the first novel. And a lot of my horror, no, it's not her thing at all. But
Does
it
she,
has actually.
uh, does she appear in any of the characters in your first novel?
It's impossible to write without your friends and family appearing in everything you do. I have murdered people I shouldn't have murdered. I've murdered people who I wish I'd murdered. I've and I've celebrated people who deserved to be celebrated. They, I think, as a writer, you pick up from everyone. You're this huge cosmic sponge that walks into a room, and I get my ideas from everything. Like I got an entire short story out of a WhatsApp chat. Two of my mates were geeking out about the heavy metal band Rat, and next thing you know, I've done a story.
I
Parts of
know
that were almost copy and pasted.
it kind of comes from everywhere. I I find that my grandmother peers around the corners of a lot of work, but I wrote a like middle grade novel, which Fox Spirit Press published in 2017 called The Girl in the Fort. And it's about an 11-year-old girl and her grandmother who tells her stories. And the stories kind of form the framework of it. It's a project I mean to go back to because in my head it's a trilogy. As you could probably guess already, my life is full of unfinished projects or
Oh,
to be continued.
I've got over 100 stories that I've written and or I've partially written, and I've picked them up, and then I've either realized I'm over my head, or I'm writing about something I don't know enough about, or I've written something and I've gone, that's not interesting at all. That's where's the spark? So yeah, I can relate. I think unfinished projects are what keeps us alive.
Mm-hmm. I suppose as horror writers, they haunt us.
Oh, absolutely. So we mentioned looking for Wild Goose Lodge, but that's one of many folk horror stories you've written. What draws you to folk horror?
Um, I suppose it's it's very much in my blood, should we say, and I do believe in kind of epigenetic memory, because we are, after all, the product of our parents, we're the product of their grandparents, and so on and back. And my maternal grandparents, especially, were kind of rural folks. My grandfather's lineage is really interesting. They were he can trace it back to, well, he could trace it back to the Earls of Louth and Meath, and then his section of the family had kind of renounced Protestantism and embraced Catholicism, and because of that, they were disinherited and they became gardeners. Now, this is in the 16th century. My grandfather was a gardener. So there's something about that memory of the land that I really believe in. I think it's impossible in Ireland to walk around it without being aware of the kind of spectral quality of the landscape and what it holds within it. I'm very fond of the phrase storied landscape because everything goes down in Ireland and then everything resurfaces. Like
Yeah.
we we have a dark history and we're at once pulling away from it and fascinated by it. And I think folk horror becomes a useful analogy for that experience of colonization, of complex kind of histories and contested territories. But I mean, I could talk a lot about it and will happily do so. But I just find for me, it's a well that I keep coming back to because when I was writing my first short story collection, which the Unheimlich maneuver, which looked at the domestic uncanny, I was also putting together what I fondly thought was going to be my folk horror book, New Music for All Rituals, which I finished in 2016, was published in 2018 by Black Shuck Books. But I kind of thought, well, that's that then. That's that done, but it keeps recurring like folk horror itself. So there was the middle grade novel, my 2023 novella, This Shut Me Up, and the book that I've just put the pen down on, well, until edits come back, Queens of the Crone Age, which again leans into this notion of it's rapidly coming together, if you like, a collection of themes which are kind of folklore, feminism, and revoicing that seem to me so innate in folk horror.
That's a gorgeous title as well.
Which one?
Queens of the Crone Age.
I know it's a really bad pun, first of all, which which I always enjoy. Um, I had a companion piece to my first collection that was called Unheimlich Maneuvers in the Dark. So
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of the pun. But yeah, I think I was looking for a title that suggested kind of um, majesty and kind of awe and beauty. And hag, unfortunately, has become so reduced in meaning to something which is derogatory and
Yeah.
doesn't speak to that quality of elderhood I wanted to draw on. That I started going towards crone and then queens, and the rest is history.
Yeah. I mean, even crone is now seen as like a derogatory term, but it works so well in that title. Hag just reminds me of EastEnders when they would yell at each other. You hag.
Yeah, yeah. Hag, like I love the word hag because it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Um, uh, and it has, and in Irish the term is even more interesting, cailleach, which has means everything from kind of archetypal landscape goddess to last sheaf of wheat from the corn, corner of the fireside, a particular kind of bed, a withered potato. It's just
I've
like
been called a withered potato before.
I confer haghood upon you then.
Wonderful.
Anyway, what's in a name?
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, even like incredibly derogatory words like slut, originally in the 60s, it meant that you were just a bit lazy. You were the person who at 5 a.m. when all the housewives went out and they scrubbed their front doorstep and they joined the sud trail. If there was someone who didn't join the sud trail, then they were called a lazy slut.
Oh yeah, no, it was considered
Uh,
sluttish to be sweeping dust under carpets and such like
yeah,
lazy
and,
shortcuts.
and now it's a whole sexual thing. So, yeah, these words change over time.
I guess it's interesting though, because with that evolution of language, and again, the folk horror analogy,
Yeah,
because we started off this conversation where you made a really great point about the Morrigan and what would such things look like in the present. And for me, that's the absolute interest in folk horror. It was the folklorist Alan Dundas who talked about folklore as a living entity. And I love that idea that it's constantly changing and it's reflecting concerns. And because when you think of it, we only tell a story if that story captures us in some way. It speaks to us, it has some kind of meaning, or it embodies some kind of value. So the stories that we tell, like, there is a sense to all of them. So folklore is that giant amalgamation of multiple tales. I think it's just pregnant with meaning.
And secrets as well. Small town secrets.
Also, the silences in folklore are very interesting. So, for example, in Ireland, where we have that awful memory of the famine, which was effectively a kind of like kind of 19th century genocide, but there's a dearth of folklore to to do with the most awful aspects of that. And I think it's just sometimes I sometimes find it very interesting to analyze those silences and what they tell us about the unspeakable, which is, I guess, where the Gothic comes in.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote about the Irish famine myself. I wrote about it from the point of view of a vampire whose food source was disappearing. And so you're taking this sort of like all-powerful person and putting him in a situation, and you realize everyone's affected with the food chain. So he ends up moving to Birmingham. I don't know if that's an improvement.
I don't know. I think after the kind of famine cottages, anything would have been an improvement. So
yeah, no, that's true. That is true. So we've discussed like these archaic terms, hag, crone, slut, even. Um, how do you feel about the responsibility of us as writers for cultural preservation?
um, I personally, I can't speak for everybody, but um, and I'm aware that my output is small and humble, but I do.
No.
No, but I do think a lot about what I write. And I try and write carefully, I write respectfully. I write very much within my own lived experience, and within the lore that I grew up with, because that for me gives me a sense of surety. Um, I think that today, when we look around, we are living through a golden age of horror, make no mistake about it. I mean,
Yep.
even cinematically, like the
Yep.
films that are banking money, superhero narratives and horror. And I
Yep.
think that they're both sides of the same coin because, I mean, in academic discourse, people talk about Trump Gothic and Brexit Gothic. And I
Yep.
think that horror is a place where we can put our fears. It becomes a container where we can put all that anxiety that we're feeling, whether it's about the environment, as you mentioned already, or whether it's about kind of political uncertainty or the rise of the right. And I mean, if I look at kind of horror, even like last week, I went to see 28 Years Later, and it was just like, good Christ, this is coming down with Brexit
Yep.
horror. But it was
Yep.
just this perfect analogy of the cutting off of Britain explicitly from Europe, the kind of dialogue between Europe and Britain, kind of through the Swedish soldier and the young boy. I'm not spoiling anything, by the way, in case you haven't seen
Yep.
it. But I think that I'm very moved at the moment about the way that the Black experience has been reflected through horror. I think that the wealth of work that's being done at the moment by the wonderful Eden Royce, who writes so knowledgeably about root magic and really
Yep.
demystifies kind of a lot of the kind of, I guess, white legends that have grown up around it. But even I think the horror that's moved me most in recent years has been like horror that has something huge to say, like Jordan Peele's Get Out and Us, kind of speaking very much to the history of racism. Um, Nia DaCosta's Candyman, which is so urgent and beautiful and connected with Black Lives Matter. And even recently, Sinners, which had that great analogy about kind of how we speak through music and how we tell these kind of narratives. But I mean, this is where I feel horror really comes into its own when past meets present, and when horror upholds the narrative rather than becomes the narrative.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think of it. Okay, the best example I can think of is His House, the movie. I'm really obsessed with kind of movies and I find them very influential. But His House I loved because it has that forced displacement of the kind of refugee couple who come to Britain, and we see Britain through their perspective, and the haunting that follows them is like a cultural and traumatic haunting that speaks so much to what they've left behind and what has come with them.
Yeah.
And oh, I could talk about it forever. It just gives me the chills. But I
I
think
was going to raise that
that's
exact movie.
the way. I saw you
Yeah,
smiling.
with Matt
Mentioned.
Smith in it as well. Ah, I and I really liked how it ended on a metaphor, because we're not 100% sure if there was actually a demon there, or if it was the attempt to forcibly get these people who have suffered so much trauma to integrate and abandon their own values. That has meant they've had no mechanism for processing this trauma.
Yeah, yeah. I
And
think I think that this apathy, this night witch, just becomes, as I was saying, like it becomes a useful repository for all this fear and all this trauma and all that, you know, that narrative that's only glimpsed as the movie goes on, kind
yeah,
of and is revealed through memory. It's so powerful.
oh, it is. It is. It's a truly phenomenal movie that I wish everyone would watch it. But I think one of the problems is that people who watch his house are already supportive of the movie's message. And the people who most need to see it would never watch that movie.
Yeah,
And
look, it's. I think folk horror is at a really interesting moment because it's opening up. There's a lot of diverse narratives there,
yeah,
but it's also a really dangerous time for folk horror.
yeah,
And I had this conversation last week at the Ghosts conference where we're talking about the annexing of folklore by far right groups. And I
mm,
spoke to a friend of mine from Belgium who said, like, who's very interested in folklore, but said it is a very problematic time for folklore in Belgium, where folkloric motifs and stories are being annexed and being retold. But yeah, because when you look at folk horror itself, sorry, you've just gotten me started,
no,
but
continue.
when we look at the first flowering, the first official flowering, as it were, because there are lots of kind of ancestors of folk horror of the 60s and the 70s.
Yeah,
I, but even in that first flowering, it's quite white, it's quite colonial. It's, you know, the innocent outsider who's actually, you know, a representative of this colonial world going into an othered kind of community. And okay, it is a great vantage point, you know, from the writer, but I think that the folk horror that speaks to me most at the moment is the folk horror that's coming from inside the tent, if that
yeah,
makes sense. So I'm more Lovecraft country than Lovecraft.
yeah, yeah. I mean, Lovecraft, I absolutely praise his writing. I think he's phenomenal. But I mean, there is definitely a case for updating Lovecraft to remove some of the more problematic parts of it. I think it definitely, we need the original because we need to understand how people thought back then. But we also, I think, as modern writers, let's move on and produce something that's slightly more ethical.
Oh yeah, no, I'm a big, I'm massively in favor of cultural sensitivity and kind of thoughtfulness. But I'm also no fan of going back and trying to rewrite
No,
stories. I
don't
just think
whitewash.
that's super problematic
Yeah,
because it's but I think it's a consequence of the world that we live in, where you know um, social media has such knee-jerk reactions to everything. I mean, like I grew up in an era in Ireland where my only reflection of the Irish experience, apart from, some Irish writers that we studied in school, some great Irish short story writers like Frank O'Connor or Sean O'Faolain, but they weren't modern writers.
yeah,
So when it came to the Irish experience, it was always through the lens of usually the English or the American lens, where it was often very derogatory. It was like the jolly top of the morning kind of leprechaun or
yeah,
the stereotype of the drunken Irishman. But you know something, as a kid, I read that and I thought, nah, I mean, there was no equation between that and the world around me. So I think sometimes we do people a disservice
yeah.
that we feel that they can't recognize these things. I think that we can.
I also think I should clarify, I was absolutely not talking about rewriting original works because that is abhorrent. Like a story that has been written is a snapshot and should be encapsulated. They've gone through and they've rewritten Ian Fleming's James Bond books to try and remove the misogynistic and racist elements from it. I'm like, no, 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 leave them as they are. When you write modern fiction, obviously you're looking at it through a modern lens, but we need to know how things were back then. Otherwise, we're pretending it never happened. And that's the
Yeah.
worst crime.
Well, half of me is an academic, so but I think it's really interesting to analyze those kind of problematic texts and to figure out why that point of view was acceptable. I think as a social historian, you have to learn from the past and move
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
Otherwise, yeah.
And also, you see how they change over time as well, because Lovecraft himself, his early writing was heavily anti Semitic, but then he married a Jewish wife and his writing changed because he got exposure. And I think that has relevance to today as well, because with everyone meeting through social media and apps, we no longer have the random bumping into people in cafes and in pubs where you can meet a broad spectrum of society because the algorithm is focusing you down to meeting people who are only like you. And
Hmm.
so you end up in these like little bubbles where echo chambers, if you like, where everybody thinks the same and then they magnify their one perspective, which I think is very dangerous.
I think it's gotten particularly, I think since COVID, folk horror has become really interesting, right? Because, that kind of claustrophobic narrative is really, I mean, it speaks to us all. But I also think with COVID, we've got a dearth of traveling and, real lived experience. So we've got this surreal um, kind of bubble that's kind of commonplace of it, that's mediated through screens. And also, if we look at kind of the Brexit or the Trump
Mm.
scenarios, I mean, they're essentially very insular. So,
Yeah,
so, and I think that's where we have this interesting and problematic notion of how folklore is being used. Because within these insular communities, they're saying, well, this is our heritage, this is what we're pulling on, to create these modern kind of narratives of insularity and racism. But in actual fact, when you look at folklore, it's full of otherness. You know, it's full of the weird, it's full of the strange, it's full of strangers, you know. Um, it's it's a very broad and rich spectrum, and I think that, yeah, anyway, lots more to say on that, but
I watched it was actually a folk horror comedy the other day, and I really enjoyed it. It's one of those movies I feel like I should have hated, but I absolutely loved it. It was called Get Duked, and it's about four inner city kids who get sent to Edinburgh to do the Duke of Edinburgh Award. And so they're in this sort of insular Highland community, and they're being hunted by the Duke of Edinburgh with a shotgun. And it's hilarious, but also it's poignant, and um, yeah, and the community they meet are wonderful, absolutely wonderful. But it's very much the fish out of water, which works so well in folk horror, because you always have the outsider going into this community and then finding it's got these secrets, whether or not they're cosmic secrets or whether or not it's ancient secrets. But it's always there's something wrong in that community from the point of view of the outsider.
Yeah, I think the Wicker Man was the first kind of, and I mean, like the book's quite interesting. David Pinner's Ritual that it's based on, but it's the movie itself that I find really mind blowing because it has all the fabulous. It's first of all, it's the first folk horror movie to be set in the contemporary era, and that I think gives it a massive punch. But also, it's very clever in the way that, number one, it draws on the Golden Bough, so James kind of Fraser's kind of the a lot of the traditions to do with the killing of the king are kind of brought in. So it's very well versed. But it also really makes a lot of that idea of the syncretic, where you've got Christian beliefs overlaying old pagan traditions. But it also explodes that as well by revealing that Lord Summerisle's grandfather invented these traditions. Um, so I love the movie. I had the great privilege of introducing it for its 50th anniversary screening in Ireland as part of a film festival.
Oh,
And
fantastic.
I find every time I watch that, I get something different out of it. And I love the way that we're like our loyalties sway during that movie as well, um, because Howie is pious, virtuous, and thoroughly dislikable, whereas the pagan islanders seem much more humorous and kind of beguiling. And then we come to the end, and
Yeah.
there's a big rug pull. I don't know why I'm preserving spoilers on a 50-plus-year-old movie, but
I'm pretty sure everyone will have seen it. It's
first I
Chris.
watched it, I had no idea what I was going to watch.
I was 10 when I first saw it, and I it was the first time I've seen a movie where the protagonist dies. And so my little 10-year-old mind, it was Hammer Horror Hour um, on the BBC, which is it always used to be like between 3 and 4, I think it was in the morning. And I was sat there glued to the TV. And then when it ended, I was just like mind blown because the hero's supposed to win.
Yeah. And I think it
That's
puts us in this very uncomfortable, we have to sit with this uncomfortable feeling as the credits go down
yeah,
because there
absolutely.
is no redemption. Nobody flies in at the last moment
No,
to kind of
no,
split the Wicker Man in two.
no, I was horrified. And I mean, that is what horror is about. It's also Christopher Lee's favorite character. He enjoyed playing Lord Summerisle more than anything else.
Mm.
He
Didn't
felt,
he actually buy the rights to the book that the movie was based on?
well, I don't know.
I
Uh,
think he was quite instrumental in the making of it as well.
yeah, yeah, I don't know. I know that he loved it.
Yeah, well, don't we all? It still remains for me one of the really great, like, earth-shattering folk horror moments.
Yeah, it was the first time I was distraught after a movie. So yeah, it has that impact.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's visceral.
so we're talking about folk horror, and how do you, as a writer, how do you ensure authenticity, uh, particularly when you're confronting more colonial and patriarchal distortions of stories?
Well, I think I'm fairly lucky because I'm female and Irish. So I don't, I think it must be difficult if you're an English writer, kind of grappling with those notions, kind of. But Ireland isn't exactly of a legacy of empire, you know. But I do think about this a lot, and that's why I mostly write folklore that's Irish folklore, because
Yeah,
that's my terra firma.
yeah.
Because I've been like a field worker. I've collected folkloric narratives. I've analysed them. I read a lot about folklore. I teach a unit in kind of folk horror, um, and I always like Irish folklore is one of the richest in the world. And so I think it's something I can keep going back to. And it's also quite regional as well. So the map behind me of the Ivory Peninsula is somewhere that I did a residency in 2012. I've subsequently gone back kind of 4 times. And that's really rich in narratives of the hag that you don't find necessarily in every other part of the country. So I suppose that's the kind of richness. I do I do find like I mean I am leaning into increasingly writing. Oh, I forgot I've got my books beside me and I've completely forgotten to use them throughout. But this is my last novella, and They Shut Me Up, and it was so it's a novella that where I'm trying to talk about without giving away the premise, because of course I want people to buy it from PS Publishing, but it's essentially a revoicing of an older ghost, which is based on a real kind of Irish aristocrat, Myra Rue O'Brien, who lived just down the road from where I live now on the West Coast. So I did lots of archival research to try and find her voice. So I guess in kind of addressing these notions of authenticity, I do a lot of research. So when I use a folkloric story to riff off of, to write a contemporary narrative, I know that story.
Yeah,
And, you know, but I've also reflected on what relationship does that story have to the contemporary era, because I don't write historic folk horror, and it doesn't really interest me. What interests me is the here and now, and the urgency with which some kind of narratives from the past reach out and confront the present, and the
yeah.
kind of polycrisis that we're living in. So with They Shut Me Up, I was particularly interested in notions of menopause, invisibility, um, of kind of patriarchal, a kind of I suppose suppression, and of kind of female silence. So, but then I had to say, well, what does this historic character have to say to that? So this was an amazing woman who like rode to battle with her husband, who repelled kind of English invaders, who has this very colorful kind of life. But then at a crucial point, she marries a Cromwellian soldier. And her lore, then, as I found it in County Clare, where she's from, it just descends into these kind of stories of villainy. She becomes like a woman who's really kind of, her reputation becomes completely blackened, you know. So it's like she had 25 husbands. She hung her maid servants up by the hair and cut their breasts off. She hanged her male kind of servant of the kind of tower of her castle. She held a huge feast and invited everybody in and killed them all, a la Red Wedding, including her infant daughter. I mean, these are palpably made up stories.
Yeah.
But what I became interested in was, when we unpick these stories, what are they actually telling us? And it was that she was seen as a Cromwellian kind of colluder.
Yeah.
Through making a marriage that essentially she made just to preserve lands for her offspring.
Yeah.
So it was the case of, I can't find any comparative stories about men who did similar things. And there are plenty who would have renounced their faith or changed sides, but because she was a woman, it was really unnatural. And that became the aperture through which I could kind of get into her story. It was like, so this idea of, the contemporary dilemmas of women in midlife suddenly become amplified by this huge narrative of a woman who's had her story overwritten and rewritten and retold. So yeah, I guess that's my kind of interest is in, but it's a project I'm only getting to grips with because I've just written a book chapter for an academic press, which was looking at the process of writing that. So I was looking at there's a very beautiful Irish book called The Ghost in the Throat by Doireann Ní Ghríofa, who's an Irish poet. But it's essentially a forensic investigation of a poem, and it's the poem seen as female text and the interpretation of that female text by the female writer, and it all gets very meta and very beautiful and very ghostly. So I guess I was looking to examples like that when I wrote it. This is a very long answer. I really apologize.
No, it's the answer I asked for. No.
It's basically, to sum it up, it's a complex process but very worthwhile.
Yeah, no, I get that. I think it's one of the reasons I very rarely write outside of the United Kingdom or Ireland, because I need to have enough information about it in order to do it proper justice. I have written once from the perspective of someone in New Orleans, and I had to rely very much on my friends from the area to help me out with that. Even basic stuff. Like I was mentioning that they had notes in their pockets, which makes sense if you're English, but they're bills in America.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
And even with my English fiction, I have to be sort of semi-wary, because I wrote a ghost story where a girl takes a Yorkie out of her pocket, and my American readers were like, "Why did she have a dog in her pocket?" And I was like, "Oh, right, yeah, no, two meanings, right, gotcha."
I know. Well, I think with folklore as well, I'm usually very hesitant to write kind of folklore from a different context. I mean, I mentioned some lovely examples earlier of the African American experience that's currently being told, and it's very beautiful, but that's not my story, and that's not my right. I mean, I loved Ryan Coogler's kind of connectivity between the Irish kind of bardic tradition and the kind of Southern kind of music, but this is not my story. I did write a novella which is published in, I guess, Press's Unquiet Grove. And it was based, I had a Saari Fellowship in 2023, and I was living in Finland in a forest. And I was commissioned to write a story about an unquiet grove. So I could not write something.
Yeah.
It took me a solid month to write it. And that's because I had to go into it in a very particular way. So I was learning a bit of Finnish. I was kind of speaking to my Finnish friends about their folklore. and what had been passed on to them. I was doing a lot of research about the forests and about the place of the forest in Finnish folklore. I had Finnish friends to read it. Yeah, there was a lot of processes I had to go through before I felt comfortable
Yeah.
kind of writing that story. And even then, I wrote it from the point of view of an ethnologist who's come to Finland. And that ethnologist had my own background, which is Irish German. So, I mean, normally I'm not mad about writing from the perspective of somebody outside the situation it comes in, because I think that's been done to death in folk horror. But from this point of view, it kind of dealt with something I've always been fascinated by, which is the way that contemporary folklore collects contemporary narratives and analyzes them to try and find the reason for things happening the way they do.
Yeah. There's quite a few very good supernatural episodes about that as well. Hashtag Team Dean. Yeah, one of my unfinished novellas I wrote was about a woman who was being gaslit when she was going through postnatal depression. And the reason it's unfinished is because I am a gay man who is the most unqualified to write about anything to do with postnatal depression whatsoever. And I think it's not just a case of I couldn't find anyone who could do sensitivity reading for it. There are lots of women who have written about postnatal depression and would be much better at writing it than I would. So it's one of those things where finish it because you get it out of your system, but don't publish it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think sometimes, I mean, like my first collection, I didn't even realize it was completely female voiced, and completely first person. It's funny when you read a review and you think, oh, yeah, that's right. It is. But I remember hearing that book discussed on an American podcast, and it was two guys, and one of them said to the other, and he was kind of joking but serious. He said, "There's a lot of bad boyfriends in this book." And then I started thinking, oh my God, and this is something that's never quite left me, is you actually need to think more carefully about your male characters and about the male perspective as well. Look, I'm a staunch feminist, but I also became aware that I was perpetuating a really bad tradition, which it was man as eternal antagonist.
Yeah.
And you know something? And that wasn't my experience of the world either. So I was replicating this because I think that we need to model the world as we would like to see it as well.
Yeah.
So I tend to write quite a lot of hopefully more nuanced male characters now. And I've written some stories from a male perspective, which I found really challenging at first. But I remember writing a story for an anthology called Imposter Syndrome, um, which is called The Wrong House. And as part of it, James Everington, who had kind of curated it, got us all to read from each other's stories at the launch. So again, playing on this idea of doubles and kind of the uncanny, and we weren't quite sure who'd written what story. And I heard Gary McMahon read my story, and that I'm sure Gary would laugh if I told him, but that gave me confidence. Because when I heard it in his lovely, resonant northern voice, it was like, yeah, that's a man's story. So, but I think I overthink anything. I don't write from my own experience. But I think that's not a problem. But so I would say if that story is really burning at you, write it, but really walk yourself through it emotionally.
I think that's the thing. it was burning at me, so I did write it. But now I've written it, I can put it to one side and I can say, okay, you've done it. I don't think it's something that needs to be published, but it was something that I needed to write.
Mm. I wouldn't put it in the bin though either.
Oh, don't worry, everything is cloud storage now. Even the things that should be got rid of, they are there for life. The
I am a huge fan of the beta reader in
oh yeah,
just seeing if it worked, you know.
I am blessed with some excellent beta readers. They're not the most enthusiastic. I mean, I like to be told that I'm the world's greatest writer at every opportunity. But the usual reviews are like, "No, it's not your worst one." But they are exceptionally good at finding anachronisms. So little things like that track is actually was 2 years before or 2 years later, so shouldn't be in the story. Even basic things like in one of my stories, a woman falls into a tank of jellied eels, and I mentioned that I it's not having the best time, to be honest. It's not ideal. And he goes, I think you'll find that eels don't have scales, Tom. And I was like, oh, right.
I know that's I always call that the sense read, as in,
Yeah,
does it knit together? Does it land? I
yeah,
find the most helpful ones are when they say, I'm not quite sure what's going on here. When I think
yeah,
of something delightfully ambiguous, and the feedback is no, but like what's actually happening?
yeah,
You know, it makes no sense. There's been this jump
yeah,
because sometimes, especially if you really spend quite a bit of time in a story, you get a bit snowblind.
yeah. And especially if you're in a situation where you've got multiple people talking to each other, that can be a nightmare. Uh, I always say in that situation, look at fight scenes, even like if you read erotica, sex scenes, they handle these things very, very well, and they can sort of help with these multiple people. Yeah, that's going on the internet forever. These multiple people having dialogue and doing actions at the same time than how it's done.
No, that doesn't make it sound any better.
No. Oh gosh. Oh dear. Here we are. Got to love the internet.
See, I'm going to say smugly that I tend to write very quiet interior kind of things. So
Right. Yeah. Yes. Yes, that would work. I should have gone with that. And the problem is with YouTube Shorts as well. I know it's going to zoom in on that on like a 30-second segment where it goes, Newton Webb says you should read sex scenes for dialogue. No.
and then cut rapidly to the snippet about lots of people doing lots of things.
Yeah. Okay, dark times. So yeah, before I get cancelled, uh, uh you have got this fantastic background in Gothic art. How do you find that has shaped your narrative structure and settings in your writing?
Um, yeah, I sometimes find it difficult to analyze myself because it's just one big kind of knitted kind of monster that's kind of where all the strains come together. But I think I am very visual in that often a story will come from an image that I have.
Yeah.
I'm a trained art historian. I worked in design for 10 years. I've had a lot of lives. I've worked in kind of galleries, museums. So, I mean, I have used a gallery as a setting before. I've, I, so for example, actually, you see this image behind me?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, that's that's drawn from a project that I did with students where we did a 24-hour project with art students from two institutions where we spent the night in a haunted castle kind of doing photography, recording sound, etc. And it was like an amazing experience. And one of my stories in my 2018 collection, Tracing the Spectre, was completely based on that experience of working with artists who were kind of recording these manifestations. Anyway, but yes, so I think that there's a lot of interconnectivity between art, academia, and the creative writing. And it's always been entangled together. I mean, this is 15 years of deep entanglement since I started creative writing, which became a way to kind of express the interconnectedness of all things, horror and terror. But I would describe myself as multidisciplinary. I've helped run death cafes. I've organised Gothic conferences. I've directed kind of site-specific performances to do with kind of hauntings, and I find that every activity that I engage in like that tends to echo in my creative writing. I don't do it for that reason. I do it because I love it and it sounds fantastic. I mean, like every convention or conference I go to, I come out of with, oh my God, I need to do something with this person because, they're investigating this very interesting area. I mean, I actually made a promise just last week. It's like, we're going to co-organize a symposium and it's going to be on bodies and stuff. And bodies and stuff has now become our hilarious kind of tag for what we want to do. But anyway, yes. So I suppose with the Gothic, especially because it's been part of my upbringing. I was a teenage goth. Even before that, I was a melancholy child whose grandfather was a cemetery keeper as well as a gardener. And our house was built on our house is 300 years old, but it was built in an older graveyard if you overlay the maps. So there is this sense that the Gothic for me is very much part of comfort, identity. Um, and I have a paradoxical relationship where it's both a source of terror and a source of comfort. So everything from, but what it has in common is that it moves me in some way. So whether it's art, whether it's literature, or even my own writing, there's that thing, that this compulsion that is connecting them and driving them on.
And you've mentioned that even when you're traveling, when you're on holidays and so forth, you always take story notes.
Oh, always. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I couldn't imagine not doing that because I don't know. I think, I mean, I didn't get to travel a lot till my 20s. So when I did, I was just like, it became an obsession to record how different the experience was. And I'm really interested in the idea of heterotopias as well, of these kind of special places and spaces that exist under certain conditions. And I think that's kind of true of every country you travel to. And I think being from an island nation, you really get that experience, especially in Ireland. You have to get on a plane or a boat to physically go to another space, Um, so there is a bit of Islemania, I think, in me. I just really adore that notion of kind of spaces that exist on other kind of islands. Anyway, but yes, setting is really important because, I mean, I wrote a story which is coming out in October, and it was based on a visit to the Paris catacombs. And I remember sitting down after coming out, and I was just quite shaken. It was a huge experience being down there. And I got up to the surface, and the first thing I did was sit at a pavement cafe, get the notebook out, and start writing down, how it smelled, like how, like just the contrast between the damp, cool air and the kind of stifling air of a Parisian summer, and then I started writing, what could happen here, and I mean, I didn't develop the story for another 2 years, but that was a root of it right there in the setting.
Yeah. I went on holiday to Crete, and my boyfriend learnt, to his detriment, never take a writer to a museum. Never, never. We won't leave. We got to read every plaque because every little plaque is a story.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite things about this, this was the big museum of Heraclion, and it was talking about the legend of the Minotaur and the labyrinth and where it came from. And Crete was the first, the palace of Knossos was the first mega construction in Europe because we all sort of came across in the migrations, and Crete was in the middle of the Mediterranean. So in the Bronze Age, it had access to all of these resources and riches. And so the labyrinth, it wasn't the maze that we think of. It was just a big palace that people got lost in because they're not used to buildings of that size and scale.
Mm.
And the legend of Theseus and the Minotaur, raiders take over the palace and they have to hire Greek mercenaries to oust them. And the Minotaur is because Crete was one of the very, very few islands that could afford cattle. They always used to wear bull horns, and the flag symbol is a helmet with horns. So the Minotaur, yeah, it was just the invaders.
Oh my God. I'm at the moment of reading Robert Graves. Oh, it's here. It's in my pile. The White Goddess. Now, that book is a trip because it's a mythopoetic reimagining of the cults of the Mediterranean,
Yeah.
but being fundamentally goddess cults. But I'm also reading as well the Greek myths by Robert Graves, but he he takes like Fraser and kind of the ideas of the kill of the importance of the king and the killing of the king and the fertility of the crops, and he says no. If we go back further, the king is irrelevant. The king is just a boy who was sacrificed, and it's the huge matriarchal mother cult. You know, that's essentially what it's all about, and he traces this relationship between it and poetry. Now, he's got a real archaic notion of poet as male and muse as female. So the argument kind of falls down when he gets to contemporary period. But I find it a very compelling notion. But in the Greek myths, he does that deep dive into Greek history. And he's like, well, if we think about what was going on at the time, we can see that a lot of these are disguised actors, which this is why I'm fascinated by your account of the Minotaur, you know, being essentially soldiers in fancy dress.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Amazing.
And because of their oral tradition, they have memories of these events. Like it was only 6,000 years beforehand that we had like climate change happened, and there was huge flooding in the area. So
Mm-hmm.
things like when Zeus created the huge flood to punish mankind for cannibalism, they remember these huge floods. When they had the Titanomancy, it was because Sicily had erupted, and the entire world from their perspective
Yeah.
was just ash and explosions. And you would think that the gods are at war with each other, because what else could explain this massive destruction, all the people dying, the crops dying because the sun can't come through? It's something on that scale can only be explained to someone who doesn't have access to the scientific knowledge that we have now by the gods are at war. And
Yeah, I recently wrote it. Well, last year I had a story published, which is called the, or was it? Yeah, late last year, called the Woman in the Water. And it was based on the idea that there's a lot of stories of drowned goddesses in Ireland. Like every river holds a drowned goddess. And that's like post Ice Age melting, when, you know, the rivers would have swollen up and covered the land.
yeah,
But I ended up writing it as a kind of an analogy for domestic abuse and kind of femicide narratives, and how they're kind of concealed but apparent. Um, yeah, so I think I'm always fascinated by that notion of there's a deeper secret inside the secret.
Yeah, absolutely.
We could talk about this all day.
Oh, we could.
But we can't.
So I'll segue away. Now, you've mentioned that Sigmund Freud and Kristeva have influenced your work, and this is very much your background and education being brought into your writing. Uh, how how do you find that psychology helps you with your writing?
Okay, well, first of all, I'll just say that I actually really hate Freud,
Oh
but
gosh.
I love his essay on the uncanny. And it was that essay that inspired my first collection, which was Domestic Uncanny, which takes a lot of the examples that he
Yeah.
uses, like dolls and doppelgangers, and I was quite conscious in the way I framed that collection was could be read almost as a companion piece to Freud's essay. And the
Yeah.
same with Kristeva. I mean, I find Kristeva interesting, but kind of complex. But her essay, The Powers of Horror, and in particular her treatment of objection, I just loved. It was like, if you if a limb becomes amputated, is it still you or is it other than you? And it was that weird ambiguity of bodily autonomy that kind of drew me to Kristeva. And when I read the sentence, I spit myself out. I object myself. I thought, oh, this is what I've been wanting to write about the female body experience. I constantly in these kind of liminal states, and is this mine or not mine? A narrative which sadly has become really kind of relevant today. But I tend to draw on academia in a limited way. I find that I'm I'm very maybe some editors I've worked with would say I'm a bit of a control freak, but I have a very strong sense of how a collection should be arranged. And for me, it's always
Yeah.
quite tight and thematic. I was kind of frankly horrified to discover other people don't think this way. So
Mm.
so it's like for me almost like a collection is like a map, and there's all these different territories that can be explored. But I just find sometimes like an academic essay will spur on that idea of, oh, I'd love to write. This is the kind of connective tissue that I can see between kind of these different strands of what I'm considering. So I am working on something at the moment, one of my many projects, but it's kind of a response to Foucault's essay, 1976 essay of other spaces, utopias and heterotopias. And there's something in it that just keeps drawing me back to it. So I know that there's probably a collection of it.
Yeah, I have to admit, all my collected works are just organized in date order. So we,
You see, you're organized.
yeah,
There's a
no, that is true.
methodology to it.
Uh, it's the idea is that you move through history. So you start off with like the sort of more ancient historical stories, and then you end up with contemporary or the science fiction ones. Uh, but yeah,
Oh,
no,
interesting.
well, yeah, no, I
I
probably should
never
put
thought of it like
a
that.
bit more thought into it. But it's yeah, my it helps because you're seeing how the same sort of horror uh, traverses through time, and you get these sort of universal fears that it doesn't matter if you're in the Starship Enterprise or if you're on joining the Argonauts. Um, the same fears of the unknown are going to be preying on you
Yeah,
because
yeah.
you're
I, I really, really agree with you. I mean, we've been talking, I suppose, all this session about that idea of recurrence, which is so key to both the Gothic and to folk horror. It's this idea of repetition, or almost even like a ghost story, the sense of unresolved business that will keep returning
Yeah.
unless some kind of resolution is achieved, which, let's face it, very seldom happens. So
Yeah.
we're kind of caught in these eternal loops, kind of like temporal loops. So I applaud your kind of use of chronology and dictation collections, but for me it has to be thematic.
Yeah.
No idea why.
I guess it's horses for courses, and whenever you publish a work, it has to be a representation of yourself. And as a data analyst, I guess that's how I'm wired.
Oh my goodness, that's so interesting. So I guess from a data analyst point of view, the chronological is perfect. From an academic point of view, where you're always moving to different projects, the thematic, yeah. Maybe we should write an article about day jobs and
How they influence you.
and spillovers.
You run a. Now I'm hoping my googling has been correct here, but you run a googling research sounds better, doesn't it? You run a fine arts program, and
that's that's a wee bit out of date.
right, okay, yeah. Now I'll go back to saying it was googling, because otherwise it makes my research sound terrible.
No,
But,
I mean, there's many me's that are out there on the internet because I've kind of
I
worked.
need to clone myself.
I wish that anything as useful as a clone. I just have like ghostly doppelgangers. But I did run a fine art department from between 2009 to 2021, where I turned 50 and I gave myself the enormous birthday present of a career break. It was the most expensive gift I've ever given myself.
Yeah.
But I have gone back. I took 2 years and I researched and wrote, but I've gone back to lecturing now, which I love. So I just found organizing a department with many shifting pieces and staff, etc. While it was very interesting, did a lot of interesting projects, a lot of interesting new programs. Ultimately, it was just I could never leave it down. It was always with me.
Yeah.
Whereas teaching is just pure joy. I go into a room and it's like, what are we going to do today? That's so fun.
But it also sounds like that could be like one of the reasons why with your anthologies they're always thematic. It's almost like you're departmentalizing them.
Yeah.
So we're going back and looking at past careers and how they influence us.
Yeah, I tend to shed my skin about every 10 years.
I think it's for the best.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember talking to some friends who are writers, and I said, "Oh yeah, I burned all my old diaries. I think I can't remember. It was in my 30s maybe." And they were like horrified, and I was like, "No, I just done with that part."
I didn't intentionally burn all my old diaries. It's just before we had cloud computing, computers would break. I would have loads of unfinished or novels or completed novels on my hard drives, and it broke. So I would just smash up the hard drives and then get rid of them and then write new stuff. And so, from one point of view, yes, I have lost out on a lot of material. But on the other point of view is that these early works that you write they're little bricks that you use to build the monument of your future career.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
and I definitely have reinvented myself on several occasions. I've been many people in my time.
I think everything I've written 90 short stories. I know because I have a database. And I think 50 of them have been anthologized, and I think 80 something have been published because a lot of them go into collections.
Yeah.
There's only a handful that I haven't published now. But weirdly, it's funny, like I won't reread any academic stuff that I've published because I just feel horror and kind of revulsion and I can kind of spot kind of things that I really wish I'd phrased differently. But I kind of tend to read over my fiction work differently. I just see it as all part of one big kind of canon of work. And even if I recognize that some of the earlier stuff can be a bit clumsy, like the intentionality is there, the feeling is there. So yeah, it's weird. I don't feel as embarrassed about it as maybe I should.
No, no, not at all. I always see these things as, like I said, steps.
Mm-hmm. And then sometimes I read something I wrote years ago and I think, oh God, I wish I could write something like that now. I got that.
There is a wonderful advantage of naivety. So when you write about things that you don't understand, you can come at it from these different viewpoints. And I'm absolutely not recommending that. But when you look at your earlier work and you think, oh, I didn't know anything about writing structure, I didn't know anything about sort of tropes or anything like that. I just had a story in my mind and I wrote it. And so even though I look at these things and I think, well, if I wrote it again, I would do it this way. There is a lot of interest and value in going back to these old stories and seeing them with a trained eye and seeing the things that because you've done them not correctly, so to speak, you might accidentally write something that is considerably better than you would have done it if you'd done it in a more structured format.
Yeah, I think because I wrote my first book and I'd never been to like a convention or met other writers or anything. I just wrote it. It just kind of grew because I was writing my PhD on the uncanny home. And then I started writing these random stories about the uncanny home. And then that collection became a book. And in a way, I think I might have been too intimidated to try and publish a book immediately, pretty much,
Yeah.
or to even put it forward to be considered by a publisher. But I had the kind of courage of innocence. I didn't realize that the place was teeming with writers and who had kind of and that there were so many opinions on horror and kind of blissfully unaware. It was just like, oh, I really like writing about the uncanny, so I guess I've just written a book about it.
Yeah, I do think that naivety is brilliant, and there are many times when I wish I had it back. But you can only step forward in time. You can never step back.
Very true. Unless you're a time traveler.
I was immediately thinking of Doctor Who. Immediately. Give me a TARDIS. So earlier on in our conversation, you talked about in body horror and wounds being like the entry point for horror. Um, Many of the protagonists that you write about are women confronting transformation, and this could be physical, psychological, or even mythic. How do you find that relates to like real life?
Um, well, I guess one of the reasons why I was drawn to write I Spit Myself Out was, again, part of my lived experience as a woman, but also as a chronically ill woman. And so I was very interested in the idea of disease as dis-ease and that
Mm.
idea of living with the body that presents outwardly as normal and then inwardly is like just a chaotic mess. And, but it was also because I was aware of, again, the lived experience in Ireland, where body autonomy has not always been something that has been kind of part of our constitutional right.
Or
Um,
England even.
Yeah, oh yeah, I know. I mean, in a sense, I look at what's happening in the UK now, and it's like looking into a dark mirror of kind of Ireland many years ago. Um, but I was aware as well that, there are all these notions. I'm always very interested in contested territories. And I think, unfortunately, women's bodies have been constantly played and replayed in that arena of the contested territory. Like, I read Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale back in the 80s when it was published, and it had a seismic effect in me. I think I've reread that book, well, maybe more than most of my rereads, because it's that idea of um, and again, it's that Christeva notion, is what is mine and what is not mine, and the idea
Yeah,
of the body as colonized by patriarchy or by the medical gaze, or um, it, becoming literally possessed by kind of another entity or by a big emotion. So yeah, I think, like, I remember somebody, fellow writer, saying to me, we were trying to describe each other's stories, and he said that mine were essentially women sitting in rooms and thinking, am I going mad or am I not? It's very fair. Because I am constantly preoccupied with that idea of metamorphosis, and I think that we all are. Is that idea of change and potential change, and how quickly it can happen. Like, I'm between projects at the moment. Well, between many projects, but just finished a big one. So I'm letting myself free write, and I find I keep
yeah,
writing about women changing into things. I don't know whether this is a midlife thing, and I don't know where it's coming from, but they're quite comic, kind of angry narratives. So I'm just going to follow that and see where it goes. But the idea of woman as metamorphosis, I think, because it's something which is just such an intrinsic part of the female body from puberty to menopause, is that the body is always fluctuating and kind of um, cyclical and yet very other.
I wrote two stories in a row about mpreg, male pregnancy, and that was because my mother had a cancer scare, so it was about growing growths where they shouldn't be. And for me, mpreg is sort of the epitome of that, because it's something that very definitely shouldn't happen. As a gay man, I should know. I've tried. Um, but yeah, it was because of this fear of what my mother was going through that it manifested in my writing. So, um, I mean, in one case, it was spiders that were gestating inside a man, and in another case, it was eels. Eels crop up a lot in my writing. I think,
That's what I was just going to say. You should
yeah,
look at the symbolism, and there'll probably be something there that will.
there's some layer of trauma there. I mean, I'll figure it out eventually. I mean,
An unfortunate incident on an eel farm, maybe.
it must have been. It must have been. I've just deeply repressed it. But there are always these recurring motifs in your writing.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, like, I know we were joking, but not to get away from the deep heart of what you just said, which is that we do bring our traumas and preoccupations to the page, but there is, I don't know if it's a kind of an exorcism, because the real life situation stays the same, but I think, do you think that we always feel a little better for having articulated the unspeakable?
Oh, yes. So when my dog Duke died, I wrote two stories. They were both effectively love letters. One of them was Robin Hood finds a dog, and the other one was from the point of view of the dog. And they were both very emotive stories that they didn't necessarily do tremendously well, but they weren't intended to. They were, I needed to write about my love of my dog. And
You were writing from the heart. That's a
I was
very
writing from the heart. And I also needed to know that my dog loved me, as well, which is why I wrote it from both perspectives. And it was yeah, it was very important I wrote it. It was slightly out of genre because it was more action than it was horror, but for me, it was just something that needed to be written.
And I think you've tapped in again to what we discussed earlier, which was that idea of kind of horror as this vehicle, or kind of writing, broader writing as a vehicle for conveying something which is very real and very emotive.
Yes.
But in disguise.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Yeah, mpreg and cancer.
I know.
Yeah, these things are always related, even if when people read them and they think, oh, where did that idea come from? You probably.
I remember my sister, who's an artist, said to me during COVID, because we were separated, so we were talking a lot and emailing a lot. And she said, I don't know what people are doing who don't have a creative occupation, because she was like, I'm just painting around the clock. And I was like,
Yeah.
I'm writing so much.
Yeah.
And it became, though it was quite difficult for me because I was finishing, I split myself out, which were stories of disease and kind of bodies and uneasiness. And I was trying to stay kind of sane at the same time in this epidemic that had separated me from my entire family. So yeah, there's sometimes a bit of cognitive dissonance in horror as well. Where it's like maybe, and sometimes there's a feeling of too soon. It's like I haven't really synthesized this experience. I'm just all hurt right now. So maybe I need to wait.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, otherwise you only get vowels coming out on the page. Screaming vowels. So you've written a lot of stories with unreliable narrators. I've experimented with this, but do you have any advice for writers on how to write an unreliable narrator?
I guess just a few things. I think it requires very careful construction because, and it's exactly the same if you've got a twist ending. When you read the story back, it always must make sense.
Yeah.
That it was coming. So with the unreliable narrator, you have to tell the story in a way that is carrying the reader with you. The reader believes you, believes the narrator, and I think writing in first person is generally the way that I would approach it. But you need to skillfully, with tweezers, drop in little incidents that, when read later, will make you think, actually, that was a clear departure from the truth. But it's really a story that can be that is ambiguous and that sustains its ambiguity to the end. I mean, I just finished reading Arthur Machen's The White People, and wow, like that's a crazy, crazy story. And but yet, are we reading it from the point of view of the writer of the Green Book, which is nestled within the White People? And are we taking that as an authentic description, or is this somebody who's going mad? Or is it somebody who's possessed by a folkloric entity? So there's so many ways to kind of read it. But fundamentally, it comes down to the narrator is unreliable, and we can take our meaning how we wish. So I think the chief bit of advice I would say is, if you can retain the ambiguity and make several hypotheses plausible.
Yeah. We go back to the movie His House, which we were discussing earlier, which again could be viewed from multiple ways.
Yeah, or I remember reading a book by a Northern Irish writer, I think, Robert McLean Wilson, and the name of which I have now forgotten. But which is just as well because I'm about to spoil it. But there is a pivot turn within that in which you realize that the narrator has lied about something very large in the text. And as a result, we start to unpick everything. And it's a very powerful moment. And I always wanted to kind of emulate that.
Yeah. It's so hard because often the thing you want to emulate the most is the emotive impact of books that you've read.
I know, right?
Which is the hardest thing to do.
I honestly believe that Shirley Jackson almost destroyed my nascent career by writing The Haunting of Hill House. Because it's like, well, why bother write a haunted house novel?
Yeah, I can relate to that. So I see you've got a mood board behind you. What's your writing routine?
I'd love to say I had a routine. I would say I go through periods where I'm more regimented. I'm driven by deadlines. So if you give me a deadline, you'll get your story, you'll get your edits. But if you don't, I'll just drift around. I mean, this is my writing space in the house, but I'll also write anywhere that takes my fancy. So I don't have a set routine. I don't have office hours. I tend to write mostly in the early mornings because I find before I've spoken to anybody, that's when that's when I hear my own voice most clearly. But if I get stuck in, I can write for hours and hours, and I'll forget to eat, and everything will just go to one side. But my process is generally I take a long, long time to think about a story before I put pen to paper.
Yeah. So
I'll do a kind of a spider diagram or a couple of questions. What if there was a woman? And then I'll kind of build on that, and I'll scribble little ideas and images. And then I'll start to write snatches. It's almost like being a medium and something is communicating with you.
Yeah.
But my problem is just sitting with something and getting it done.
Yeah.
I'm picking up a lot of psychic phenomena, not just a singular voice.
Yeah, I do find that having an area that's dedicated to writing very much helps me because like right now I'm in my gaming room, and the problem is the moment I sit in this room, whilst I can write anywhere, this room very much identifies in my mind with gaming. So I immediately want to load up Steam and do something else. When I was younger and I used to live in house shares, and so I'd only have a bedroom, I had extreme problems with insomnia because my mind related the bed with work. So when I was lying in my bed, I was not able to switch off. I was constantly working.
Yeah.
And the moment I could afford it, and I recognize this as a privilege, my bedroom is just for sleeping and romantic cuddles.
I can just see the third clip in that sequence.
Yeah, I can sometimes shut down parts of my brain and self-censor sometimes.
My house is very zoned because I'm quite dyspraxic. So it's like, yeah, this is the study. But and likewise, I can't have phone or TV or anything in my bedroom. That's like the dead zone. And that's why I can sleep 8 or 9 hours a night.
Yeah. Yeah, no, if I get a text, that immediately sort of takes me out of it. And there was one of the things that when I was a computer programmer, everyone was very aware of the fact that if you go up to a programmer and you distract him by asking a question or anything like that, it will take them about 40 minutes to get back into the same level of concentration they had before. They're aware of it. They didn't take it into account. We had ridiculous meetings constantly. We were constantly being badgered by project managers asking us questions to which They could have waited until the end of the day. We have meetings that should have ring fenced all of these questions, so we should have been left at work. We never were. But yeah, and I think the same thing happens with writing. My first 40 minutes is very slow. It's me poking at the page because I don't want it to have a white page, so I'll just get some words down on there so it's non-threatening. If I'm doing traditional writing with a notepad, I will squiggle on the page first, because the moment it's no longer a clean page, it is 10 times easier to write on.
Oh, interesting.
There's no intimidation.
I've got, I don't know how many notebooks I have, and I've been trying to organize them into, this is for this book, this is for that. No, that doesn't work. So I've got scribbles everywhere. I journal. I start the day with 5 different journals, each one reflecting on a different aspect. And that's how I ground myself in the mornings.
That is impressive. And yeah,
or crazy. Or crazy.
Well, no, I mean, I'm not supposed to have caffeine, which is why I do all my best writing in the morning, because I restrict myself to just having 2 coffees. And I have those 2 coffees in the morning, and I'm like, right, get writing, because I will never be as productive as I am now.
I kind of wish days started at 3 a.m. and ended at 3 p.m. because that's my cycle.
Yeah.
I'm kind of clinically dead at about 3 p.m.
Oh God, yeah. No, absolutely. So for me, I'm used to getting up at and walking my dog at 6, because I had a German Shepherd with a double coat, and you can't, like, I see people walking their German Shepherds in midday, and I'm like,
Yeah,
come on, it's not fair. They can't take off their jacket like we can.
yeah. I had a husky, so similar early
Yeah,
morning walks. Yeah,
same double
very
coat.
long ones.
Yes. Yeah. Um, how do you fuel your writing? Is it tea or coffee?
Um, Tea, coffee, procrastination, despair, tears, blood. There's a lot of liquids.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm both, um, and a lot of water.
Yeah.
My top tip for writers is keep hydrated.
Especially in this weather. My goodness.
Yeah, but I tend to be driven on by, sometimes by fear, sometimes by curiosity, and sometimes fueled purely by caffeine. There you go.
Yeah. Caffeine induced rage. Well, I think that's healthy. So, you've been traditionally published with all of your books, is that right? No self-publishing?
Um, no, I mean, I think that um, I think it's a great route, and I have actually self-published a hybrid novel that I wrote under a third name with my best friend, who was a commercial romance writer for many years, and we wrote a
Right.
um, and she was published with Simon and Schuster, and then because she's incredible and she's got a whole background in marketing, she started to self-publish. So I do technically have a self-published book. It's not under my name, but really it's more because I've always had jobs where there was a considerable amount of admin to be done. I mean, I
Yeah.
worked in 3 different academic institutes in kind of departmental roles, and I couldn't face the thought of all the admin that would go into self-publishing, and that's the
Yeah.
really lazy, horrible reason.
There
um,
is a lot of admin and a lot of marketing.
so I guess I've just always been very happy to go with the route of kind of submitting to publishers, and um, I've just had the joy of working with some really great small presses as well, which would be a really big bit of advice for anybody starting out, is to seek out the small presses and kind of look at the calls that they're putting out, because it can be a great way to kind of meet people and but also get some great advice kind of from those who are kind of further up. So, for example, my very first story, to bring things back around, Looking for Wild Goose Lodge, that was published by Hic Dragones, which is a micro press operating out of Manchester. But when I went to the launch for that, Ramsey Campbell was there because there was a story of his that had been published in it. And I was like a massive Ramsey fan. And to be sharing a stage with him with a reading of my first story was just something jaw-dropping for me. And then I realized how egalitarian things are when it comes to horror, because when the Shut Me Up came out in 2023. It was at the PS Publishing launch, and Ramsey was also launching a book at it. So I felt, oh wow, it hasn't been a long time, but it feels like a big journey to have gone from that to this.
Oh, very envious. Very envious.
He's a really kind person, and he's so encouraging of younger writers as well. He's a real monolith. It was brilliant to see him get a lifetime award at the last FantasyCon.
So, what are you currently working on?
It
sounds a little bit like, and where do you see yourself in 5 years?
I recently put up a meme on Instagram which had that question, and it was like an image of the ancient English tradition of the ornamental hermit who you would buy to live on your property and who would read books and go around dressed as a medieval druid. So there you go. 5 years time. That's my retirement plan. But until then, I've finished Queens of the Crone Age. It has been accepted by a publisher. I'm under embargo at the moment because contracts, etc., yet to be signed and announcements to be made. So I'll be doing edits on that. And so I'm working on a kind of a collection as well about liminality and strange spaces and ghosts called There Where I Am Not, which is based on Foucault's essay. I'm nearly finished a small collection of Gothic crime, which will be called Down We Go Together. I had stories coming out in autumn in a C.M. Muller anthology, Harvest the Night, which is folk horror. Mark Morris's Fever Dreams, which is coming out from Flame Tree. And just announced yesterday, Newcon Press's urban folk horror collection, Blood in the Bricks. I've got a story in that as well. So, yeah, it's busy. I've got events coming up in the autumn as well. I've got an in conversation and I've got a talk, and yeah, but there's always something new coming up, and I love that. I'm always open to it.
You are a machine. That is impressive.
No, I mean, well, you should see which state all of these projects are in. You know, it's an eternal juggling mission.
Yep, can relate to that. So, oh gosh, I have kept you talking for 2 hours. Yeah.
Well, you have to tell me though what you're working on then.
What I'm working on.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, so I've just finished a story which is about an artist who's trying to replicate Francis Bacon's The Scream. He did the Screaming Popes, and this is Pope Benedict X, and he's trying to get himself into the mindset of Francis Bacon when he did this Scream, and he can't get it until he goes into these depths of depravity and has to completely destroy himself down to build himself up. And then what he comes out of in the end, he doesn't have the painting that he was expecting, and he is a completely different person.
Okay.
Plus,
By the way, there is a theory that Bacon was severely asthmatic, so those kind of gaping mouthed popes are possibly kind of related to the idea of struggling for air. I don't know if that's helpful for your story.
Where were you 2 weeks ago?
Sorry. I was procrastinating over a story of my own.
Yep, I know that life. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I've had an absolutely wonderful time, and I have learnt so much from you. You are a font of knowledge.
You know, this has just been amazing. It did not feel like 2 hours, and you have my kind of unrestricted permission to cut large chunks of it if you so wish. Thanks so much.
Don't worry, it goes out unedited and unfiltered, which is normally a problem for me.
Well, it's been it's always a joy, as I said at the beginning, to discuss writing and horror, and it's just been so lovely hearing about your own views and your own books, as well as kind of waxing lyrical on my own. So thank you for that.
Been an absolute pleasure. Thank you. All right.